Welcome back to the fourth part of the Origin Symposium, which also features the first Prix Ars Electronica conversation. We thought that this is an ideal match, an ideal fit. Hybrid art, the category, fits very well into this symposium. We found that the sequence of events is a very good one. We started with an overall view of the cosmos yesterday. We heard about CERN, quantum physics, the string theory. This morning we learned about managing innovation from Rolf Heuer and Joey Ito. And now we're going to enter into our core subject, which is art. It's not art by itself, but art that is fully committed to its dialogue with science and has become a kind of artistic science with its projects. Art has been able to show that things get really interested when artists get involved in science, because the question of the importance or the significance of scientific findings arises. I asked Oron Catts not just to moderate this part of the program. He was a member of the jury for hybrid arts. The prize winners will be presented this afternoon. Oron Catts himself was the first winner of a golden Niekerk in the hybrid arts category in 2007, when we first introduced the category, and he represents Symbiotica and the achievement of Symbiotica. Symbiotica is among the real pioneers when it comes to not just playing around, not just dabbling in science, but really getting into science very profoundly without being caught by it. Symbiotica has always developed its own identity. It's a hard road, a stony road, a stony path. He's going to talk to us about that during the first part of the afternoon. I asked him to act not just as a moderator and a representative of the jury, but also to tell us more about the experience of Symbiotica and the outstanding work done by Symbiotica. After that, we are going to have presentations of the prize-winning projects of the hybrid art category. It's a very dense program. We decided not just to present the golden Niekerk and the two distinctions, but also one honorary mention. And if you permit me, I like to engage in a bit of advertising. Monday evening, the prize winners of the digital music category will present their works, but there will also be a presentation by Dimitri Gelfand. I think it starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening, but check that. I'm not quite sure about the program. That will be a great opportunity to experience the works by the prize winners at the OK Center. The Golden Niekerk winning projects have been presented, and Monday evening you can have a live experience. That's one of the qualities of this festival, that there are different approaches which are made possible for our participants. We are in an extremely exciting phase in the development of identity of the arts when they get involved profoundly with science.
For taking up the responsibility to moderate this afternoon session, but even more for bringing all your experience. And please start with the first part with your lecture. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. It's really great to be here, and obviously it brings back memories from quite a few times I visited Ars Electronica. And I think what I thought about doing is basically giving you so much of a feel-good talk. I can be quite critical and I can be quite nasty, but I thought that this opportunity would actually give me a chance to talk about what happened to someone who, or to an organization that wins the Golden Nika, and where can it take you. So, yep, we've got the presentation up there. I promised everyone that I'll be really strict about time, so I'll be strict about time with me. The reason why I framed this presentation under regulated transgressions is the fact that as artists working within a scientific context, we need to adhere to all of the regulations that are in place to do with research. And we need to find a way to do so while transgressing this whole notion of what the scientific areas that we are engaging with are, as well as what artistic practices can become in this context. So the feel-good story is that as we heard in 2007, Symbiotica won the Golden Nika, the first hybrid arts Golden Nika, and that was a really good springboard for us to see if we can get more support. And not surprising, hopefully, that the state government of Western Australia came and knocked on our door and said, we've got money to give you, which is a great feeling to have someone offering you money as opposed to going and chasing it. So in 2008, we became a center of excellence, which doesn't mean much in the art world, but within the scientific context that we sometimes operate, being a center of excellence is quite a big deal. And by combining the forces of the University of Western Australia, where we're based, and the state funding from the government of Western Australia, we're able to expand quite significantly the type of activity that we were doing in the previous 7 or 8 years. And that allowed us to really push ahead some of the agendas that we had before, then we could not fulfill without this extra recognition as well as the extra money. We always frame Symbiotica as a research center. We're a laboratory that is dedicated to the research, learning and critique of the life sciences, but through a hands-on engagement. What we are doing, we are putting people into the lab in order to engage in a very intimate way, in a very experiential way, with one of the most urgent zones of cultural scrutiny, and that's the shifting relationship that we are forming with life through our understanding of life through science, but even more importantly, this growing attempts to engineer life and to treat life as a raw material. And we believe that culturally, we don't really have the language, both verbally and visually, to deal with those very radical, very rapid shifts in the way we relate to life, in what we choose to do to life, in the way we are trying to engineer life. So we're not a production studio, we're not a place where artists can come and do residencies in order to come up with an end product, although that obviously happens in the end. We really framed ourselves being based within a biological science department at the university. We framed ourselves as yet another research laboratory within that context. And that leads to some very interesting places. So from the very beginning of Symbiotica back in 2000, we were endeavoring to try and identify those shifting perceptions of life. What's going on in the life sciences and the application of that knowledge that really needs our attention, that really needs cultural scrutiny, that really needs people to engage with it using the very same tools, but in a way that questions, in a way that deal with the very basics of our relations to life. And we do it in order to propose alternative directions in order to initiate cultural debate. We are not interested in finding the cure for cancer. We're not interested in helping scientists in the most utilitarian way. We are interested in creating awareness. We are interested in trying to find ways in which we can actually use that very same knowledge that the scientists are generating, but as opposed to the engineers and the utilitarian approach that they're taking, to try and show other ways and other directions in which this knowledge and in which this research can take place and take us. And we do so by creating what our good friend Stellak is often talk about, this idea that contestable scenarios. What we're doing there is up for debate. We are not interested in bringing closure or in finding new knowledge that is there with the emphasis of solving problems. We're actually problematizing the very same issues and technologies and knowledge that we are involved in either generating or involved in engaging with. And it's an extremely important thing to remember that the role of art is to engage in contestable scenarios. Artists are not there to bring any closure or warm, fuzzy feeling, or that's what I feel. So when you think about, and hopefully some of the works that I'll present to you throughout the next few minutes would make you uneasy. And this zone of unease, this area where cultural perceptions of life are in conflict with what we're doing to life, is exactly the area that we're interested in probing. This is a place where we are interested in interrogating and convey this uneasiness that is concerning the use of living biological systems for human-centric ends. And we do so, as I said, through this very informed hands-on engagement and hands-on experience. And the reason why we put artists in laboratories to do the work themselves, and the model that we developed is that of mentorship, where the artists are interested in developing a project. They're not commissioning a scientist to do it on their behalf. In most cases, they don't even collaborate with the scientist in a traditional way. We have a network of about 20 scientists that we would put to mentor the artist until they develop the skills they need in order to do the project themselves. And by doing so, they can't step back. They are implicated in the very same issues that they're trying to critique or engage with. They can't be self-righteous. They need to find other strategies and other ways in which they can feel appropriate and feel a way in which they can engage with those very same issues without taking this back step or without being there as observers. So again, I just want to emphasize the fact that what we're able to do at Symbiotica is something which is still a fairly unique thing, and that's opening up those laboratories for artistic research and engagement. And so what we have are fairly scarce resources that we make available to artists, and when we have to assess applications of residencies, when we need to get people in, the main concern that I have is how well they are going to be able to exploit those very scarce resources that we made available for them. So we're trying to be fairly pluralistic in the way and the type of projects, and hopefully you'll see when I'll give you a survey of some of them, in regard to the artistic approaches, but we only get people that we feel are going to use those resources in a way that is worthwhile their time and our time. We're not interested, again, in people looking over the shoulder of scientists. We're not interested even in people using what we refer to as traditional representational techniques, because they can do it elsewhere. What we are interested in people that are willing to jump into the deep end and engage in a very experiential way, in a very hands-on way, with the actual manipulation of living systems. But in order to do so, we need to get all of the right clearances. So quite a lot of what we do, and we actually created quite a few international precedents in regards to allowing people to do things to themselves and others that legally or otherwise might be problematic, and that's through the whole area of ethics clearances. So we need to go through the university, through the institutional ethics and health and safety clearances, and this is a fairly tedious process to go through, but it can be quite fulfilling. Just as an anecdote, each time that we have a change in personnel in the Human Research Ethics Committee or in the Animal Ethics Committee or the Health and Safety, we need to, in a sense, retrain them. And to some extent, we go to the length of even putting disclaimers on our ethics applications that this is what they are reviewing is an artistic research, and it might contain traces of irony, which can be gone quite unnoticed sometimes. So, as I said, research is the most important thing we're doing, and we can look at our research, which is broadly including this idea of the philosophical exploration of those shifting perceptions of life, what I referred to before, but also the idea, the very same thing that we are engaging with, this very transformation of life into a raw material, this very engineering approach towards life allows us access to those very complicated and sophisticated forms of manipulation that have been standardized and have been made easy, so engineers can do so, and scientists and artists as well. So the idea is that what we have now is a new palette of possibilities for the manipulation of life that we need to figure out what to do with it. So we are identifying and developing new materials and subjects for artistic manipulation, and we are researching strategies and implications of presenting living art or living systems in the context of art and culture in different contexts, in museums and galleries and in other contexts as well. And this is something that I might touch a little bit more when we reach the jury statement, because I think that's quite important when we look at the overall field of hybrid arts and how the issue of finding the right strategies, of engaging with new knowledge, and how we as artists choose to present it is something that I still believe needs more research and more exploration. And speaking about the fact that we're not into any type of utilitarian research, we have one little arm that we refer to as an enabling technology arm, where we are developing this idea of technologies for research and presentation of living biological systems in non-specialized environment, meaning in galleries, museum, and artistic context. And this is a very interesting area because you see more and more people, artists and otherwise, who are taking the amateur and hobbyist approach towards biology, and I think it's an extremely important thing to do. We see the high-end scientific equipment on the other end, and we don't have the in-between area where artists can actually engage in self-initiated research of biological systems, but also be able to present biological systems within the context of the gallery and the museum, where they need to adhere to very strict regulations to do with public safety. So we are developing, and what you see in the background there is a sketch of a designer called Matt Johnson that worked with us on one of the bioreactors that ended up being displayed here in the show in Visceral in Dublin earlier this year. So this is a mid-range, if you like. It's not as cheap as what some of the hobbyists are doing, but it is a mid-range piece of equipment designed specifically for artistic presentation and artistic research. This is a bioreactor. Another area we're looking at the moment, we're actually working quite closely with engineers to develop a muscle bioreactor and actuators that basically would start to move living tissue around, and you can see some of the sketches. This is just to put it in context that we also engage in this type of research as well. On top of our research area, we are actually the first place in the world to offer a Masters of Biological Arts. In 2006, we started a master's program where we are offering the most successful, I would say, or hopefully the real MBA, Masters of Biological Arts, where we get people from different disciplines to come and do a two-year degree where they fulfill both coursework and research project. They can come from either the arts or the sciences. And we are now starting to offer also PhDs, and we offer a few undergraduate units as well within our university. Saying that we are a research facility, we also need to fulfill some of the idea of research, presenting research outcomes, and that can come up in the form of exhibitions. So we are involved in setting up exhibitions and obviously presenting our work everywhere in the world. And as I said earlier, this year we had a major retrospective show at the Science Gallery in Dublin called Visceral, where 16 very complicated works have been presented, showing a time range of the 11 years of the existence of Symbiotica and quite a few different modes of engagement, artistic engagement with living systems. And you can see here, this is just a shot of the laboratory that was the center of the exhibition, where it was there to enable some of the works to survive throughout the duration of the show itself, as well as a place for workshops and other engagements. We're also developing different types of symposiums, including recently one concerning body art and bioethics, and another one to do with biodiversity. That's the bioethics one. And we run workshops, international workshops. We develop different types of workshops, including just recently a workshop we've done in collaboration with Arts Catalyst and UCL and Synthetic Aesthetics to do with synthetic biology for artists and other interested parties. And those are very intensive, usually week-long workshops where we teach and train people in some of the most basic, but to some extent also quite sophisticated approaches to the manipulation of life. In this case of the synthetic biology workshop, it was specifically to do with synthetic biology. Other workshops are to do very much with a wide range of artistic engagement with the life sciences, but also a wide range of human intervention within living systems. And those workshops are quite interesting in the fact that we are getting quite a lot of lab skills offered, but also quite a lot of discussions of what it means for us as a society, as a culture, to do those types of things to life. And we have almost every Friday afternoon an open seminar where we invite people to come and talk to us and have quite intense discussions about many different issues and many different topics. But in a sense, more than anything else, Symbiotica is a residency program for research. And since 2000, since we started, we had more than 70 residents coming and exploring different aspects of life through the direct engagement with living systems. Let me emphasize again, Symbiotica is about life. So we are, and as you can see here, this is somewhat of a taxonomy of areas of engagement that already had been explored. It's a partial list, actually, of areas of engagement that already been explored at Symbiotica. And we, as you can see, what we have here is really a wide range of scientific engagement, ranging from the molecular all the way up to the ecological and anything in between. And as you can see, as the shirt of Pia says there, come over to the dark side, we have cookies. So we are trying to also get some cookies involved. So what I thought about doing now for the next 5 or so minutes is to run very rapidly through some of the works that have been developed in Symbiotica. And again, this is a partial list. This is just a way to give you some sense of the range of research that we are involved with. So we're starting just randomly in neuroscience, and actually it's kind of interesting. This is a piece that evolved from a piece that was presented here in Ars Electronica back in 2001. At the time, it was called Fish and Chips. Then it was developed into a more sophisticated piece called MIAT. And the idea there is that you have a robotic arm that is driven by living neurons, which are communicating with the arm via the internet. And you create this form of, I suppose, non-utilitarian mark-placing device that is being driven by living neurons, a culture of neurons that is growing over a multi-electrode array of, so basically a culture of neurons that would be able to have two-way interaction and two-way communication with the real world through the embodiment of the robotic arm. This piece was then developed even further, and it was done in collaboration with the Steve Potter lab at Georgia Tech, the neuroengineering lab there. And here you can see the next generation, if you like, a piece called Silent Barrage, where the audience is actually going into a sense of an amplified environment that represents the culture of the neurons on the electrode. So each one of those robotic poles over here actually represent a region within the culture and represents the activity as it's being measured by the neurons. Now, the neurons are being stimulated by the movement of the audience within that space. So you have this very interesting and disembodied to some extent, because the neurons live in Atlanta, and this installation is traveling around the world, where the audience is actually influencing the activity of the culture of the neurons and see in real time the response of the neurons within this architectural space. Another area was to do with neuroacoustics, and this is the work of Nigel Hellier. It was actually presented here in 2007 when we had the showcase of Symbiotica's work as part of a Golden Nika, or the Prix Ars Electronica show. And what we have here was a bunch of crickets listening to neuroacoustic recording of a cricket listening to a lecture about their own sex life. And it was kind of, in a sense, a post-anthropocentric piece where the piece was actually designed for this audience of crickets, and the incidental human visitor was just incidental in this case, exploring the space and listening to both the lecture about the sex life of the crickets as well as the electrical response of the recording of them listening to that. And here's a work that moves towards biophysics, a work of Boo Chappell, a very interesting artist who is very interested in making the body strange, or looking at how the body is actually such a strange sight. And here she was trying to create a speaker out of bone using the piezoelectric properties of bones that exist in nature. And a work of Paul Thomas, where he was using an atomic force microscope to engage with living and dead cells. We also had quite a wide range of people who are not the traditional people you would think would come to the type of laboratory that we have. So we had geographers, museologists, art historians, science fiction writers, social and political scientists, and we actually have one of the political scientists who did a residency with us over here in the room. And they were researching alongside artists, but again, the idea of them coming and doing research is, as long as they have a project that involves wet work and involves work in the laboratory, we would accept them. We're not interested in anyone just coming and looking at us or coming and engaging in a purely theoretical research. They need to spend time in the lab. And here's some work with plant biology, which just for the sake of time, I'll jump. Ecology, we have a very big project around Lake Clifton, which is a lake south of Perth in a city called Mandurah, and actually Auto and Object just spent a couple of months there recently as well, developing work around this very unique environment that has one of the last surviving colonies of those organisms over here, those trombolites, which are basically a community of cells that create structures which are very similar to the original structures or the original fossils of life that is found on Earth. But now there's only about 10 active sites of those types of organisms still producing this type of structure, and many of them are in Western Australia, and many of them are being threatened by global warming and urban development. And Lake Clifton is a great example of that. Lake Clifton is suffering now from overpumping of the groundwater and reduction of rainwater. So the pumping of groundwater is obviously to do with more land use and more people around the lake. The reduction of rainwater is being attributed to global warming, and there's also runoff of nutrients that makes the lake too rich with nutrients that basically creates competition for those structures, and it's becoming hypersaline as well. So we had a range of projects around them, including this piece over here, the autotroph, which is an exercise in engineering futility. This is a desalination fountain that collects water from the lake and uses the heat from the sun as a solar furnace to steam the water, and then the steam of fresh water is being fed back into the lake. Now, this is an exercise in futility because it produces, it's very sophisticated in the sense that it's tracking the sun and everything, but it produces something like 5 liters of water a day, which means it's like trying to clean the lake with a spoon. And on top of that, if it was successful, it would remove the calcium carbonate that those organisms need in order to deposit those structures. So any way you look at it, it's a failure. And on top of that, because the lake was declared an ecological sensitive area or endangered ecological system, we can't show it in the lake anymore, so now it's traveling the world. It was just recently in China, in the National Art Museum of China in Beijing, and it's collecting its own carbon footprint together with kind of excessive use of water sitting inside those children pools and trying to desalinate them. Now, moving all the way down from ecological systems to molecular biology systems, this is a work of Paul Vanus that was here as well in 2007. And Paul is a very interesting artist who is engaging with gel electrophoresis. And here you can see the latent figure protocol, a project that he developed where he was able to basically hack into the DNA fingerprint system to start to create recognizable images as an encryption device. And the work of our first graduate student, Veronica Minerals, that was looking at comparing the scientific model and the artistic portraits. So she was using disease model mice that had the disease of the people that she was trying to portray and basically name those mice after them. And in the sense, this scientific model of the disease became the portrait of that person. We're not doing lots of microscopy, but just an example of one work that was developed at Symbiotica. This is work of Phil Ross, Leviathan, which worked with slime molds, an amazing microscopic film that ended up as a result of that. And the work, fairly early work from 2004 of Donna Franklin, where she was working with, oh, the dog is barking. My time is almost done. So Donna Franklin was working with those fungi, those bracket fungi, and creating this fungi dress that is both very fragile and can be quite dangerous, but extremely beautiful. And here's a work of Tani Duff that was working with basically fresh tissue from surplus surgical material. Again, speaking about precedents, what we're able to do with Tani was to get her an ethics approval. Obviously, she worked really hard herself to get an ethics approval to get tissue donated from patients specifically for artistic research and display. So people who would go through elective surgery like tummy tucks or breast reduction would be interviewed by her and would give the most informed consent for their tissue to be used for the purpose of her work. And in this case, what she did was basically creating this frozen archive and those books that are being made out of human tissue that was then infected with a lentivirus, which is a weakened HIV virus that was a transmitter of information. So the information is actually embodied within the tissue, not within the pages of the book, and are being kept frozen within a specially designed cryogenic system that Tani and engineers in Montreal developed. Symbiotica is also moving now towards the area of synthetic biology, which I think is one of the areas that need the most and most urgent artistic attention and cultural attention, because synthetic biology promised to us that this is the application of real engineering logic into living systems. So if you think that we had problems with life becoming a raw material before, it's going to be much worse. And I think artists need to be there in order to, what we heard yesterday, this idea of critical engineering, I think that's one way of approaching it, or basically looking at art as an alternative to the engineering approach, as a counter to that, is something which is extremely important. And last but not least is the tissue engineering field, which Symbiotica is quite well known in doing, especially through the work of Yonat Zur and myself, starting back in 1996, that in a sense led to the development of Symbiotica. And here you can see the victimless leather. But saying that, we had much, much more areas of research like sleep science, organic chemistry, taxonomy, sound and cognition, animals and behavior, social interventions, forensics, optics, and so forth. So there's quite a lot that Symbiotica is engaged with, as long as it's to do with life and it's to do with real intervention within living systems in the context of the biological lab. We are open for suggestions. And we're more than interested in challenging the whole regulatory system and try to circumnavigate it and transgress it to the best of our abilities, but obviously doing it in such a way that would allow other artists and other researchers to still continue working within this context. So I'll just stop the presentation about Symbiotica here, and then now I've got 10 minutes or less to talk about the jury. So let's do a bit less. So we had a very interesting time in the jury, and as you can read there, it was a very dense and engaged approach. We had 420 applicants, ranging from artists working with biological systems to artists working with what can be considered somewhat of traditional media. But within the whole system, there was something which we found quite common, and that's the idea of intervening and trying to create what is really seemed to be the notion of the hybrid. And I think it's not surprising that the works that were selected are, in a sense, representative of the idea of the hybrid in the most intimate way. I think what we see is a maturation of this field to some extent, but I think that what we're missing and what we need to see more and more is this notion of artistic resolve of complex ideas. We still see artists who are engaging with some very complicated notions, areas that, as I referred to before, don't really have a very well-defined cultural language to describe, areas that we as a society still need to come to terms with. And one of the major issues with it is how you then create the right form of artistic resolve, this right way of being able to both engage with the issues in ways which are both artistically, culturally, and to some extent scientifically meaningful, is something that we kept on going back and forth within our deliberations of the jury to try and figure out how we are going to actually deal with those issues, and how we're going to either award what we seem to be successful ways of engaging with it, while not discouraging some of the people who did some amazing work, but we felt that the work is not there yet, that this area really needs to grow further, and we need to find and work together to articulate artistically some of the most urgent and most important issues that we as a culture, as a society are facing. And in a sense, when you think about especially the three winners of the top categories, the Golden Nika and the 2 awards of distinction, although they're somewhat different, they all involve this kind of form of a microscopic intervention. There's this, what I would refer to, and the other jury are more than welcome to disagree with me, because what I'm going to give you now is my own subjective view of what happened there. what we feel, or what I feel happened there with the works that we selected, that they had this form of intentional contamination. This idea of the hybridization and the idea of the artistic as a subversive agent that enters into another system, although the winner was kind of the opposite, because when you think about the May the Horse Be With Me, it was actually the horse that was kind of intervening within the body of the artist, obviously out of the very free will of the artist, and no one asked the horse. But it still was this idea of the notion of this contamination, this notion of the microscopic intervention that was there, that in order to try and engage with some of the most important issues of our time. I think all of the works that we selected have been multi-layered as well. Although some of them can be summarized in a one-liner, I think all of them were much more complex and sophisticated and involved and, to some extent, resolved than what we've seen before. So it was kind of very reassuring to see that type of work starting to come out. What else can I say? The other thing that was raised within that is that quite a lot of hybrid arts work are not delivering themselves in a way which is appropriate for the type of presentation within a jury assessment. Quite a few of them were very experiential, and how you then transmit this experience to a jury was something that I think we still have to find ways to resolve, because I would like to see more works that are involved in this idea of the experience, the non-visual experience, that it needs to be explored further. And in a sense, that's the problem, because the only way that we could engage with some of those works was only if one of the jury members has experienced that work themselves, so we could get a first-hand report of that very experience. And we need, I suppose, to find other ways to deal with that. Other issues that I need to stress is that hybrid arts, although it seems to be dominated to some extent by artistic interventions with living systems, is way more than that. And I think that if you go to the Ocker Center and you see some of the works that have won the honorary mentions in particular, have had other concerns and other issues that they needed to deal with. So it's really important for those of you who are contemplating applying and those of you who are kind of assessing what's going on here to be totally aware of the fact that the hybrid category is really, it's not the reject category, but it's the category where works that can't fall under any other classification are coming and are being assessed. And they're being assessed fairly based on their merits, not so much about this, both the subject matter or the media that they're using. So I would, again, like to encourage people to think about the hybrid category as a place where those kind of things can be explored further without necessarily thinking about it in terms of biological art or engagement with living systems. And I suppose saying that, I'll finish now, exactly on time. And I would really like to introduce the next speakers, the winners of the Golden Niekerk for 2011. Marion Levant, I always get your name wrong. Yep. And Arton Tobjek.